Imagine capturing upside in financial markets while cushioning the downside. Well, that's the whole point of buffer ETFs. They want to keep you invested without panicking. But the buffer ETF category has become a cluttered and confusing landscape. Today's ETF battle is an audience-requested quadruple header of buffer ETFs from BlackRock, Calamos, Innovator, and Aptus. Grab your notebook. It's time to geek out on buffer ETFs. You're watching ETF Battles, and I'm Ron DeLegge. Welcome to our original series. We are just kicking off Season 7, and we are so glad to have you with us. Join our community by hitting the subscribe button, and send me your ETF battle requests in the comment section below. Give me your exact ETF tickers, and make it good. Also, be sure to jumpstart your financial future with a smarter, safer, and robust strategy. Enroll today in ETF Guide's free online courses, so whether you're looking to enhance your trading skills or improve the safety of your portfolio, or maybe planning for retirement, we got you covered. All courses are available totally free to all of our viewers. Just hit the enrollment link in the description section below. Today's ETF contest was requested by a longtime viewer named Dave. We love you, Dave. And it's been between 4 buffer ETFs. We've got BlackRock, Calamos, Innovator, and Aptus. This is our first ETF buffer matchup. These types of ETFs are very nuanced, and so analyzing them is not necessarily a straightforward thing, but man, we got the best in the business. And these ETFs are basically, like I said, designed to protect your downside, but also give you some potential upside. So thank you, Dave, for suggesting today's ETF contest. Judging today's ETF contest is a duo extraordinaire. We've got Mike Akins, founder at ETF Action, and Erik Ogard, founder at BufferLABS. Great to see both of you. Welcome back.
Good to be here. Thank you.
Great to be here, Ron. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so our 4 battle categories are cost, exposure strategy, performance, and then our mystery category. That's where you, our judges, can choose any factor or criterion that you feel is crucial to today's contest. And then, of course, our judges can also nominate wildcard ETFs if they feel there's better choices somewhere else, or they can even opt for split decisions. I've got scorekeeping chores. At the end of the show, we will declare an overall winner. Keep in mind, none of the battle outcomes that we ever do on this program are ever predetermined or known in advance by myself or our judges. The first category is cost. So, Mike, please get us started.
Oh, boy. Where do we start? So normally this is a pretty easy equation when you talk about cost, but we're getting into derivative products. It gets a little bit different. So let's start basic. From an expense ratio perspective, we actually do have a pretty big difference. The cheapest by far and away is Aptus at 25 bips. And the most expensive in this lineup is the Innovator product at 79. DMAX comes in at 50 and Calamos at 69 basis points. These funds are all relatively small, anywhere between 25 and 125 million, which means you also need to think about your liquidity risks. So when you trade these, what is your implementation cost of your bid-ask spread? They're all relatively, I would say, they're solid. You're not going to pay a ton. They've got pretty good liquidity on the screen, but you need to be a little bit more careful when trading these because they don't have quite as much depth of book, meaning that if you come to trade a big lot, you want to make sure you're using a limit order, things of that nature. But that costs can add up if you're trading in and out of these. And as the story goes on, you'll understand why that matters. But from a pure cost perspective, pretty simple. You got to give it to JANB at 25 basis points. I think they're clearly coming into the market to try and kind of disrupt the expense ratio in this area. But, and this is a big but, know that there's also the cost of managing these strategies, for managing the options that they're rolling in these portfolios, and it really doesn't pull through to the expense ratio. So there is an overall cost, but we'll get into that in cost and exposure. So for starting us off and getting going, I'm just going to give the win to JANB.
All right. Thank you, Mike. Strong start. Erik, you're up next. How do you see it when it comes to cost?
Yeah, well, the expense ratios are what they are. And of course, just purely on that, he's correct. There's a disruptive price in here, and that's coming from the JANB Aptus issue. But, I think about doing buffers well is a question of being very thoughtful about trade-offs. and engineering. And so what is it that you're giving up and what is it you're trying to gain? And how does all of what you're trying to put together with the options package give you what you want? And so it's extremely nuanced, but I like to think that if you only look at that cost figure, you could get, let's say, tricked by not paying attention to the engineering factor.
Great point. Yeah. Looking beyond just cost alone, there's so many other factors which we're going to drill down. Thank you, Erik. And that's going to take us next to what you alluded to, the nitty gritty, the exposure strategy. In other words, what are these ETFs doing? And so, Erik, you're still up. Break it down for us. How do these 4 ETFs compare?
To a degree, this list of ETFs we're considering has a little bit of an apples to oranges problem. And that is 3 of them are deep buffer or max buffer, meaning they protect all the way to the downside. And one of them, the Aptus, is just a kind of a more standard buffer with a buffer zone protected on the downside, meaning there's far more downside participation if we get beyond the bottom of that JANB buffer. And so, you know, thinking about the max buffer, I asked the question, is the juice worth the squeeze? In other words, you're protecting for 100% downside possible move, but even in the worst markets that we've seen over the last 50 years, kind of down 50%. It would be a maximum experience. So you're kind of like insuring against Armageddon in a sense with those max buffers. And so the question is that right? Then on the other hand, you're saying, oh, and you do give up a lot of upside participation. That's the cost of protecting so much downside. So these 3 max buffers, the DMAX, the CPSY, and the ZJAN, all of those have very tepid caps right now, upside caps of like high 5s, low 5%, versus the upside cap on that JANB of 13%. So I don't know. I mean, you have to ask yourself, how much downside is it reasonable to protect against? How much do you want to protect against? And then weigh that against your upside participation. This one's a little tricky because they're different animals.
Very much so. So from your perspective, which of these ETFs stands out, if any?
At this point, it feels like, you know, from my standpoint, and again, it's all about investor utility, but I've never felt it's a great idea to protect against 100% downside. Like it's a better trade-off to protect against some downside and emphasize upside participation in these. And so even though I'm not crazy about the JANB, that trade-off is a little better in my book, but it might not meet the downside coverage that a lot of people might want.
Got it. Great analysis. Thank you, Erik. Mike, you're up next. How do you see it?
Oh my. All right. So let's just do a little 101 here on buffers. Erik alluded to this really well in the start, but you have to understand that there's many different flavors of buffer ETFs. So at ETF Action, we have a special classification process for buffers. First and foremost, we classify, you know, what is its reference asset. In this case, we're reference asset is the S&P 500 for all 4, so we're good there. So we're in the same ballpark. We're looking to create a buffer zone around the S&P 500. The next thing we look at is what is the protection. So we classify based on when does the protection start. All of these start at 0, meaning that once you go off that reset price below that, you're protected to a certain point. But as Erik astutely pointed out, 3 of them are 100% protection. And to get 100% protection, you give up a lot more on the upside. And one of them, the JANB product, is 15%. There is everything in our database of 8% protection all the way up to 100% and everything in between. Buffer ETFs have exploded in popularity. And I think one of the reasons is you can't look at it from a true performance risk return perspective. You have to ask, how are you using it? What is it replacing in your portfolio? And we'll get into a little bit that on returns, but are you using this as a pure equity replacement? In which case, I would agree with Erik, you're not going to want to have as much downside protection because you're going to lose a whole lot of that upside protection. If you're using it to potentially take a little bit from your alts or your fixed income, even for your pure downside protections, then it's a little bit different animal as far as thinking about how you use them. It is almost impossible to pick a winner or a loser unless you are picking two strategies that do the exact same thing. And then at that point, I'm going to look at liquidity and cost because they do the same thing. You might as well get the cheapest and the most. So you're not going to hear me pick a lot of winners per se on this battle, but I would tell you this: if you are using this to dampen volatility of your model of your portfolio of ETFs, and it's coming out of your equity sleeve, then I'm going to lead towards JANB because it's going to get a lot more upside protection. And over full market cycles, it's going to give you a little bit of downside, but at the same time, you're going to participate in more of the upside. If you're using it, for more retired accounts and people that are purely, risk averse, they want some appreciation, then you might want to think about the full downside protection. But there's something really important to note here. These things trade, they reset based on their month, and that's the last classification we do. And I apologize, I'm going a little long here, but it's important to note that, currently the DMAX resets in December, meaning that it's going to tell you that price where the buffer, the downside and upside participation set. The other three are January. So we're all in the same ballpark there, but it's really important. All you have to do is look at the flows of these products. Every month, the flows go to the front end. People roll into the product that is resetting every month. If you look at the flows, it's, over 50% of all flows go to that month's reset. And then the final thing is there's also strategies out here, and we'll get into this as we go along, but you can buy it at the reset month and hold it, and then it'll reset once a year. There are some that reset more frequently, like quarterly, so you don't have as long a period to wait. But the price fluctuation in between times can be 1-to-1 with the market, depending on where you're at in your amortization. So it's just really unique process, and you have to be able to get into the details here. And then finally, I would note that there are folks out there, and Erik is an expert in this, that are doing it for you and that are actually saying, hey, we're going to pick where you should be at, where your downside and upside should be. And all of it matters inside of an ETF because it's going to be more tax efficient. If you try to manage these things on your own, I'm at my cap and my upside, I'm going to roll to a different one that still has room to run. When you do that, if it's in a taxable account, you're going to experience a taxable situation. So very long. The buzzer went off probably 2 minutes ago, but I feel like if we're going to do a buffer battle, I can't talk about it unless we at least set the stage.
We're going to move on then to performance. Mike, you're still up. And again, these products are so nuanced when it comes to performance, but what do you see on your radar, Mike?
Yeah, so ultimately at the end of the day, you have to make sure you're comparing apples to apples as Erik set up, and then you're looking at primarily up-down capture, right? What percentage of up-down capture can you get? These strategies are too new for you to truly have a 3-year track record. But if we just look at the 1 year to give you a sense, I'll pick the ZJAN, which is the Innovator product, good product, 100% protection. It had over the last year, as of 131, an up capture of 30% to the S&P 500. So, and a down capture of 11%. So a good positive up down, but clearly not the market, right? It's significantly underperformed the S&P 500. JANB, on the other hand, which is 15%, is going to have a higher up down capture ratio on both sides, participated in more. So if you just look at the performance of those over the last year, JANB doesn't even have a 1-year track record yet. JANB has participated much more on the upside of the S&P, and that's purely by design. And it comes back to that. So I can't pick a winner here. They've all said what they're going to do, but that's the thing. You need to understand what they're supposed to do and how to use them before you buy them. So from a performance perspective, it all comes down to when do you want them? If you're buying it today, look to the front month. So today is February. Look for buffer resets in February if you want to hold it for a year. If you don't want to pay attention to that, look for the laddered strategies that are going to do it for you kind of across every month, or look for somebody who's going to actively manage and try and identify which ones are best given the current circumstances. A lot to think about there, but for performance, I can't give you a winner. They've all done pretty much what they told you they're going to do, but that's all a little bit different.
All right, Erik, you're up next. How do you see it when it comes to performance?
Yeah, so what I'd like to provide some context, some longer term context, why there's even a buffer conversation happening related to their performance. And if you go back to 2022, that was a pretty that was the most meaningful drawdown we've had, with the exception of the very short taper tantrum we had last year. But, we had the sustained slow market sell-off in 2022. And these buffer strategies, especially if you look at the ladders, depending on whether they were highly defensive or deeper buffer strategies, or the more moderate buffers, all of them materially protected on the downside. When the market was down in 2022 at the end of the year, about 19 and change on the S&P, these were all kind of like down from between 5 and say 9%, depending on if they were super conservative or moderate buffers. And so
with no blowups, which I think is a vote of confidence in a way.
Yeah, so they did what they were supposed to do. And then if you turn the corner to 2023 and ask yourself how they do in the recovery, in 2023, the market was up 25%, and these strategies were up sort of like 16 to 19. So if you compare that downside participation against the upside participation of 23, there's your commercial. That's why these things are growing so rapidly, because they delivered the goods. And then you kind of ask yourself, okay, what's the performance been like for the four that we're looking at? And again, we've got an apples and oranges situation here with that Aptus product just being dramatically different. Here's something that's super interesting. Aptus, with this strategy, is very close to the S&P since its inception with an upmarket. Now, we always say at my firm that these things are market path dependent. And nobody knows what path the market's going to take at any particular time. But once it takes a path, these things will respond in a certain way based on when they were launched. And so this one is unique in the sense that it's a January instrument, but it was launched in October. So it ended up being a very short-term options package, and it got all kinds of upside lift. And so in that sense, people that are upside oriented might look at this compared to the S&P and say, holy smokes, that's good. Now, what I notice is since October, almost all buffered ETFs are hanging with the S&P, and some of the ladders are even ahead. And it's because nothing inside of those ladders is getting capped out. So it's this sort of like slow grind upward where they all look pretty good. And I'll say this, there's no way we expect these buffered instruments to participate in 90 to 100% of a market's upside move. This is just a weird market where they have. But on performance too, I was looking at some drawdown. And if you look at the drawdown analysis, if you're downside oriented, this Aptus product just doesn't give the downside protection, at least over this particular 3 or 4 months relative to those deeper buffers. So again, it comes back to what you want. But on performance, again, it's apples to apples or apples to oranges. And I just think if you want the max buffer, that's where you start. If you want that, any one of those three is pretty good. If you want more participation to the upside, then you take Aptus. But honestly, I would think there might be many others to consider other than Aptus if you're going for a more moderate buffer.
All right. Well, that takes us next to the mystery battle category. Erik, you're still up. So what is your mystery battle category? Which of these ETFs stands out?
So my mystery category is month. And, we're looking at the month of reset on all of these instruments. And it's just bizarre. But, I've been combing through the historical results. And depending on the month of reset, like you can look at the instruments inside of a ladder. And over 12 months, we've seen cases where 2 issues from the same issuer with the same cap, or not the same cap, but the same buffer, are 1,200 basis points apart after 12 months. Like literally the difference between a July and an August can be like 1,200 basis points. And what that has to do with is market volatility at the time the instrument is rebalancing. So if it's a high vol environment, that instrument gets a bad cap and it has impaired returns for the next 12 months. So you really have to pay attention to the month that the instrument rebalances. And so in this case, we have 2 Decembers and 2 Januaries. And what I'm saying is, when you can look in a ladder, the only difference is the month, and there is zero skill, yet you can see huge basis points difference, which shows you that rebalancing month matters so much. So I would always compare Decembers against Decembers and Januaries against Januaries, because things can happen that will make one materially worse or better.
Got it. So this sounds to me like it's a split decision based on the month.
That's right. And I think, in this case, I can't make a huge differentiating claim between any of these because December and January were so similar with no spiky market volatility.
Mike, you're next. So please weigh in with your mystery battle category. What is it and which of these ETFs stands out?
My mystery category for today is going to be time. They always think of that Rolling Stones songs, time is on my side. To that extent, if you're young and you're watching this battle and you're going to be in the market for 20 plus years and you're allocating and you're playing the game that you realize markets over time go up, these strategies aren't for you in that context of just allocating and building a portfolio. You are going to lose out in the long run over full market cycles by adding this protection because the protection costs money. That being said, I think they're very good strategies. So the other side of time is, if you do need these, if you're a financial advisor who are, 70+% of these strategies are owned by financial advisors, we can trace it back to 13F filings that are using it for their clients. There are a lot of people that are in retirement that want to participate in the markets, but they can't afford to have a major drawdown event, especially when we're trading at all-time highs. There's a lot of good reasons to use them. So the other element of time is how much time do you have to spend on your portfolio, right? And if you are truly, willing to go and keep track of where you are relative to your max buffer and where you are to where your drawdown, your safety net in that buffer, and you want to manage it, then own some of these strategies like JANB that you can say, hey, look, I'm in here, I'm participating in X amount of the upside, and I'm tracking where I'm at to my drawdown. So if I need to roll out of it into a different reset month, I can do that. That's a lot of work. It's complicated, and it can be very tax unfriendly if you're in a taxable account. The second side is there's a bunch of strategies now, and they're probably the largest funds out there that just kind of add like, hey, we're going to own all 12 of the reset months of a certain protection. We're going to own it equally. We're going to reset it every month. And to that extent, Erik alluded to a little bit that it's not going to be perfect math for you, but you're always going to have some protection and some upside because you're always resetting it where your up and downside participation is at. And then finally, if you believe that there's an opportunity to actively manage those caps and trade it, there are strategies out there for that now. Erik runs a strategy where they're kind of deciding where we're at in the market cycle, and I won't speak for him, but there's different ways to do it. And so time, if you're young and you're owning the market, I honestly can tell you, I don't think you're going to do the best by owning these products. It doesn't make sense because you will lose your full market participation, and that's why we're investing to begin with. But if you're looking for protection, you don't have the stomach to withstand a big market drawdown like we saw in the COVID or great financial crisis or tech bubble. We know these things are going to happen, and it will happen again. These strategies can make a lot of sense. And to that end, you just have to understand, if you're doing it yourself, I would probably think a buffered strategy or somebody actively managing those resets for you makes sense, unless you are one of those people that's truly keeping track of this on a daily basis. So time. How long you're going to be in the market? If it's going to be a long, long time, I don't think these products are for you. Time, if you do want that downside protection, you can't stomach a big drawdown. how much time are you willing to put into selecting them? And those are the two things to think about. With respect to these strategies, there is no winner or loser in that context. These strategies are more, hey, you buy it at the reset and you hold it all the way through to the reset, because the pricing can disconnect significantly between those reset periods. And it's just really important to know. I feel like I might have made it more confusing than it should have been, but they're confusing products.
Yeah, I think I'll just add to this because I think it can help. If you're a buy and hold person in these instruments, you can find yourself in a situation where you have 1% upside left, 15% downside, and no protection, until that happens, with 6 months to go. And if you think about it, if you have an instrument with 1% upside and a 15% downside with 6 months to wait, I can't think of a good reason why you'd wait when you could trade into something that has far less downside, or even like a money market fund. And so that's the case for not just sitting on these, but once you decide to do that, then you're opening Pandora's box and you have to have a method for deciding where to go next.
Well, our judges have spoken, and according to my final battle scorecard, this is going to be a split decision, because really, as our judges weighed in on it, it depends on the application of the ETF, how much downside protection you want, how much upside you're searching for or desire. And then two, thinking about how you're holding these, right? Is it in the context of a taxable account or a tax-deferred retirement account? That's certainly a factor. And then also the other thing too, and I think Mike hit on this too, is time, right? So if you've got a lot of time, right, then maybe this is probably not the product or the solution for you, because you've got time, right? And you want to capture as much upside as you can. We invest to get ahead, not to fall behind or break even. But those of you that are in a different situation, maybe you have a more compressed time horizon, someone who's nearing retirement or already in retirement, certainly these products can deliver a valuable thing in providing some downside protection. So great job to both of our judges for weighing in on this quadruple header, a very nuanced quadruple header of buffer ETFs. Couldn't have done it without you.
Thank you, Ron.
Thanks, Ron.
Yeah, be sure to hit the description section below. We got links to both of our judges. Get in touch. What ETF battle would you like to see on our next episode? We can do nuanced. We can also do a little bit more straightforward. We can do guacamole versus hummus, or apples versus oranges. Of course, the more linear minds prefer apples versus apples, but we can do it all. Hit me up in the comment section below with your ETF battle request. I'm Ron DeLegge with ETF Guide. Thanks for watching. We'll see you on the next episode.